Hello and welcome back to Supposedly Fun. I am here to do a reaction to the Booker Prize 2020 long list. So let's do it. Let's jump in and see what book is going to follow in the footsteps of Girl, Woman, Other by Bernardine Evaristo, which was the co-winner last year. I don't own a copy of The Testaments by Margaret Atwood. Don't really plan on reading it still, but I did read this one and I will link my review of it down below. Now, like any long list announcement, there are some surprises, some shocks, some snubs. For instance, I'm really surprised Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell did not make the list. It seemed like a shoo-in. And I don't really know what to say about that. I have been very much looking forward to reading Hamnet. I know there have been a lot of reviews of it that were going around BookTube and just the internet in general. But most of the ones I've heard have been very positive. And I'm just shocked that it is not on the list. Mind blown. I'm also surprised Jenny Offel's Weather is not on the list. That, again, seemed like at least a shoo-in for the long list. That's another book I've heard a lot of really good things about. I have not read it yet, but I'm really looking forward to it. I am a big fan of Department of Speculation, which was her previous book, and I'm surprised. They also did not nominate Aravinda Diga, who is a previous winner. I have not read it. I haven't heard a whole lot about that one, so I guess maybe it's not too surprising. Other snubs include The Water Dancer by Ta-Nehisi Coates, which a lot of people seemed to be predicting would make the long list, so no such luck. And Actress by Anne Enright, who is a previous winner and who I still have a copy of this book from the library because because I've had it since, I think, March, and I can't return it to the library because they're not allowing returns at my library right now, and I still haven't read it. Not proud of that, but there it is. But yeah, so those didn't make it. There is good news on the list. There are 7 debut novelists. There's a lot more diversity on the list, so you can't really knock that. The one that really flabbergasts me is Hamnet. I just really can't even fathom. I would have expected that to be a shoo-in for the long list, a shoo-in for the short list, and a good contender for the win. So I don't really know what to say about that. If you told me like one book that you're really surprised, I would definitely pick Hamnet. Part of me wonders if a lot of the expected books were on the Women's Prize long list and short list, so maybe the Booker Prize wanted to go its own way, and that kind of helped the diversity of the long-listed authors. But who can say? But it's going to be interesting to see how this unfolds. I don't think Hamnet is hurting for publicity. I'm just surprised it didn't at least make the long list. Now, because American authors are always a source of controversy on the Booker list, there are 6 authors who were born in the United States and 3 who currently have American citizenship. Just take that as you will. Let's start talking about the actual long list, and let's start with the 2 books that I already own a copy of. And of course, the first one is The Mirror and the Light by Hilary Mantel. I would have been deeply shocked if this had not made the long list. Even more so than I am now that Hamnet did not. But honestly, I thought it was kind of a foot race between The Mirror and the Light and Hamnet for frontrunner status. And now it seems that that goes to The Mirror and the Light. Perhaps because of momentum, Hilary Mantel has won 2 Booker Prizes in a row, first for Wolf Hall, then for Bring Up the Bodies. So if she wins for this, she already won back-to-back Bookers, and that was enough. She would be the first person to win 3 Booker Prizes, and certainly the first person to win 3 back-to-back Booker Prizes, which would be absolutely unheard of. There are people who think this book is a little bit bloated. I mean, it's long. It's a brick. You could hurt somebody with this. I don't know why you would, but you could. But I've also heard people say that it is a beautiful, heart-rending ending to the series and worth your time and the effort. Wolf Hall, to me, is a book that is very long and takes a lot of effort to get through, but it pays off. So that's kind of what I hear about this one as well. I'm going to be very surprised if it does not make the short list. But it's going to be interesting to see how all of this plays out, because there is also a sort of been there, done that factor that comes in with books like this, where 2 other books in the series have already been winners, especially when in a field that seems to provide diversity and debut. The majority of the nominated authors are debut novelists, so does that end up working against something that is so established as The Mirror and the Light? Or will it just cruise its way to the prize like The Testaments did by Margaret Atwood last year? To be fair, I would much rather read this than The Testaments, but that's me. So, first long-listed novel, The Mirror and the Light by Hilary Mantel. Second, pleasant surprise. I've heard so many good things about this book. It's Real Life by Brandon Taylor. I really need to read this book. There are a lot of books on the long list that I have not heard of, so I'm going to go through and kind of discover them with you in real time. But I'm very pleasantly surprised that this made the list. Brandon Taylor is one of the Americans. I believe he is also one of the debut novelists. By the way, I did not do a blurb of The Mirror and the Light. I have a feeling you all know what it's about. You know, sue me. But let's do Real Life. Almost everything about Wallace is at odds with the Midwestern university town where he is working uneasily toward a biochem degree. An introverted young man from Alabama, black and queer, he has left behind his family without escaping the long shadows of his childhood. For reasons of self-preservation, Wallace has enforced a wary distance even within his own circle of friends, some dating each other, some dating women, some feigning straightness. But over the course of a late summer weekend, a series of confrontations with colleagues and an unexpected encounter with an ostensibly straight white classmate conspire to fracture his defenses while exposing long-hidden currents of hostility and desire within their community. Real Life is a novel of profound and lacerating power, a story that asks if it's ever really possible to overcome our private wounds and at what cost. I mean, check, check, check. It's a me book, and I'm really looking forward to it. Especially since during the mid-year check-in phase, a lot of people mentioned this as their favorite read of the year so far. So I really need to get on this. These are the two books that I am the most familiar with, obviously, since I own copies of them, and they are two that I would love to see on the short list. Now let's move into the rest of them, the ones that I do not own. Starting with one that is very familiar with me and I want to highlight a little bit because it has been the subject of some controversy in the BookTube community over the last 2 days or so because of the reading rush, but I'm not going to go into that. It's Such a Fun Age by Kiley, Reid. And this is a book that has been on the periphery of my TBR. I would be curious to read it. I think I'm on a hold list for the audio version. I could be wrong about that, but I've heard very mixed things about it, but I'm still curious about it. So the premise of it is, in the midst of a family crisis one late evening, white blogger Alex Chamberlain calls her African-American babysitter Amira, asking her to take toddler Briar to the local market for distraction. There, the security guard accuses Amira of kidnapping Briar, and Alex's efforts to right the situation turn out to be good intentions selfishly mismanaged, and that appears to be the thing that Such a Fun Age really wants to get at, the idea of good intentions by white people that end up being either very misguided or actively work against the black person that they're actively trying to seem woke and accommodating and like an ally, but their actions are actually working against that, which to me sounds like a fascinating dynamic and one that in this current year is very needed. So I'm very curious to read this book on my own at some point, and it'll be interesting to see how this book does. Seems like it would have a good shot at the shortlist. Next is one that was completely unfamiliar to me, and I'm going to be discovering it with you as I read the plot description. It's The New Wilderness by Diane Cook. Bee's 5-year-old daughter Agnes is slowly wasting away. The smog and pollution of the city, an overpopulated, overbuilt metropolis where most of the population lives, is destroying her lungs. But what can Bee do? No one leaves the city anymore because there is nowhere else to go. But across the country lies the wilderness state, the last swath of open, protected land left. Here forests and desert plains are inhabited solely by wildlife. People are forbidden, until now. Bee, Agnes, and 18 others volunteer to live in the wilderness state as part of a study to see if humans can coexist with nature. Can they be part of the wilderness and not destroy it? Living as nomadic hunter-gatherers, this new community wanders through the grand country, trying to adhere to the strict rules laid down by the rangers, whose job it is to remind them they must leave no trace. As the group slowly learns to live and survive on the unpredictable and often dangerous land, its members battle for power and control and betray and save each other. The farther they roam, the closer they come to their animal soul. To her dismay, Bee discovers that in fleeing to the wilderness state to save Agnes, she is losing her in a different way. Agnes is growing wilder and closer to the land, while Bee cannot shake her urban past. As she and Agnes grow further apart, the bonds between mother and daughter are tested in surprising and heartbreaking ways. Yet just as these modern nomads come to think of the wilderness state as home, its future is threatened when the government discovers a new use for the land. Now the migrants must choose to stay and fight for their place in the wilderness, their home, or trust the rangers and their promises of a better tomorrow elsewhere. It sounds interesting. Part of what immediately jumps out to me is that this dynamic between the mother and the daughter, it sounds like immigration and the struggle of holding on to your culture and your heritage when you have a child who grows up in a new country and is much more able to adapt to the new environment. And that part sounds fascinating. I may be reaching with something like that. It's hard to tell when this description is literally the first I've heard of this book. The rest, I don't know. It sounds a little familiar. I don't know anything about this book. It has a great rating on Goodreads, 4.57 stars. I'm always suspicious of star ratings, so I don't know. But, I mean, it sounds interesting, but this is one that I would want to seek out additional reviews of to make a more informed decision on. Parts of it sound interesting, parts of it sound like it could be a little too familiar. We shall see. Next is another one that was completely unfamiliar to me. It's This Mornable Body by Tsitsi Dangarembga. I hope I said that correctly. It's a searing novel about the obstacles facing women in Zimbabwe by one of the country's most notable authors. Anxious about her prospects after leaving a stagnant job, Tambudze finds herself living in a rundown youth hostel in downtown Harare. For reasons that include her grim financial prospects and her age, she moves to a widow's boarding house and eventually finds work as a biology teacher. But at every turn in her attempt to make a life for herself, she is faced with a fresh humiliation until the painful contrast between the future she imagined and her daily reality ultimately drives her to a breaking point. In This Mornable Body, Tsitsi Dangarembga returns to the protagonist of her acclaimed first novel, Nervous Conditions, to examine how the hope and potential of a young girl and a fledgling nation can sour over time and become a bitter and floundering struggle for survival. By the way, I'm just going to interrupt to say that already this book sounds fascinating to me. As a last resort, Tambudze takes an ecotourism job that forces her to return to her parents' impoverished homestead. It is this homecoming in Dangarembga's tense and psychologically charged novel that culminates in an act of betrayal, revealing just how toxic the combination of colonialism and capitalism can be. Sign me up. Yes. And it looks like it's actually the third book in the Nervous Conditions series. There is Nervous Conditions, and then there's the Book of Not, and then This Mornable Body. I am going to look very closely at all three of them. That sounds fascinating. Sounds like a book I would like to see on the shortlist. But let's see what else we have. We still have a couple to get through. Next is Burnt Sugar by Avni Doshi. And this is another one that was completely unknown to me, so I'm going to discover it right now. In her youth, Tara was wild. She abandoned her loveless marriage to join an ashram, endured a brief stint as a beggar, mostly despite her affluent parents, and spent years chasing after a disheveled, homeless artist, all with her young child in tow. Now she is forgetting things, mixing up her maid's wages and leaving the gas on all night, and her grown-up daughter is faced with the task of caring for a woman who never cared for her. This is a love story and a story about betrayal, but not between lovers, between mother and daughter. Sharp as a blade and laced with acoustic wit, Burnt Sugar unpicks the slippery, choking cord of memory and myth that binds two women together, making and unmaking them endlessly. That sounds interesting. I'm going to reserve judgment on it because I don't know anything about it. It sounds interesting. This is one that I would probably seek out more information on. It doesn't immediately grab me, but it sounds interesting enough for follow-up, if that makes sense. Next is another one that was unknown to me, Who They Was by Gabriel Krause. Who They Was is an electrifying autobiographical British novel, a debut that truly breaks new ground and shines a light on lives that run on parallel but wildly different tracks. This life is like being in an ocean. Some people keep swimming toward the bottom, some people touch the bottom with one foot or even both, and then push themselves off to get back up to the top where you can breathe. Others get to the bottom and decide they want to stay there. I don't want to get to the bottom because I'm already drowning. This is a story of a London you won't find in any guidebooks. This is a story about what it's like to exist in the moment, about boys too eager to become men, growing up in the hidden war zones of big cities, and the girls trying to make it their own way. This is a story of reputations made and lost, of violence and vengeance, and never counting the cost. This is a story of concrete towers and blank-eyed windows, of endless nights in police stations and prison cells, of brotherhood and betrayal. This is about the boredom, the rush, the despair, the fear, the hope. This is about what's left behind. Now that sounds intriguing. I like the premise of it. I like what it sounds like it's doing. Again, I feel like I would need to look into it a little bit more. What's exciting about these ones that I don't know, especially is that, I had never heard of Girl, Woman, Other when they announced the Longlist last year, and it was doing exactly this, that made me discover this and want to read it, and a year later I finally read it, and, this could be one of those, and that is really exciting to me. The premise does kind of remind me of Girl, Woman, Other a little bit, but The autobiographical part is really interesting. I don't know anything about the author or anything about the book, so I'm intrigued, but I want to learn more. So I will be seeking out more about that one. Next is one I've heard of, and I know there are a lot of fans on BookTube, but I am not super excited about. It's a Paragon by Colum McCann. I've read 2 books by Colum McCann, and I've been meh about both. It is what it is. Colum McCann's most ambitious work to date, a paragon named for a shape with a countably infinite number of sides, is a tour de force concerning friendship, love, loss, and belonging. Bassam Araman is Palestinian. Rami Elhanian is Israeli. They inhabit a world of conflict that colors every aspect of their daily lives, from the roads they are allowed to drive on to the schools their daughters, Abir and Smadar, each attend, to the checkpoints, both physical and emotional, they must negotiate. Their worlds shift irreparably after 10-year-old Abir is killed by a rubber bullet and 13-year-old Smadar becomes the victim of suicide bombers. When Bassam and Rami learn of each other's stories, they recognize the loss that connects them and they attempt to use their grief as a weapon for peace. McCann crafts a paragon out of a universe of fictional and non-fictional material. He crosses centuries and continents, stitching together time, art, history, nature, and politics in a tale both heartbreaking and hopeful. Musical, cinematic, muscular, delicate, and soaring, a paragon is a novel for our time. It all sounds really interesting. I've just been burned before by Colum McCann books. I think his books tend to be too clever by half for me. Like, they have a really interesting premise, and then the execution goes off the rails for me. It's too much. It feels like it's trying to me. And I know there are a lot of people who are fans of his books, and I don't want to take away from that. But that's me, and that's how I tend to feel. So as interesting as the plot sounds, I still feel extremely wary. I do think because of his reputation, he probably has a good shot at the shortlist. Then we have another totally new to me book, The Shadow King by Maza Mengiste. With the threat of Mussolini's army looming, recently orphaned Hilary struggles to adapt to her new life as a maid in Kidane and his wife Aster's household. Kidane, an officer in Emperor Haile Selassie's army, rushes to mobilize his strongest men before the Italians invade. His initial kindness to Hirat shifts into a flinty cruelty when she resists his advances, and Hirat finds herself tumbling into a new world of thefts and violations, of betrayals and overwhelming rage. Meanwhile, Mussolini's technologically advanced army prepares for an easy victory. Hundreds of thousands of Italians, Jewish photographer Etere among them, march on Ethiopia seeking adventure. As the war begins in earnest, Hirat, Aster, and other women long to do more than care for the wounded and bury the dead. When Emperor Haile Selassie goes into exile and Ethiopia quickly loses hope, it is Hirat who offers a plan to maintain morale. She helps disguise a gentle peasant as the emperor and soon becomes his guard, inspiring other women to take up arms against the Italians. But how could she have predicted her own personal war as a prisoner of one of Italy's most vicious officers, who will force her to pose before Etere's camera? What follows is a gorgeously crafted and unputdownable, I hate the word unputdownable, by the way, anyway, exploration of female power with Hirat as the fierce, original, and brilliant voice at its heart. In incandescent lyrical prose, Maza Mengiste breathes life into complicated characters on both sides of the battle line, shaping a heart-rending, indelible exploration of what it means to be a woman at war. It has a 3.79 rating on Goodreads. It sounds interesting, but I'm going to withhold judgment and look into it a little further. Next we have Redhead by the Side of the Road by Anne Tyler. Of course, I've heard of Anne Tyler. Now, I know there are a lot of people who like Anne Tyler a lot. I have only read one of her books, and I did not like it. It was Breathing Lessons, which won a Pulitzer Prize for her. And I feel like I need to revisit it. It's possible I was too young at the time. I think I was only about 20 years old when I read Breathing Lessons. Just did not like it. And I've never read any of her other books, but I've heard wonderful things about Dinner at the Homesick Restaurant. I have a copy of The Accidental Tourist, which I'm curious to read. She's definitely become an author of note, but based on Breathing Lessons, she doesn't seem to be an author for me. But let's see what this is about, because I actually don't know. Micah Mortimer is a creature of habit, a self-employed tech expert, superintendent of his Baltimore apartment building. Cautious to a fault behind the steering wheel, he seems content leading a steady, circumscribed life. But one day his routines are blown apart when his woman friend, he refuses to call anyone in her late 30s a girlfriend, tells him she's facing eviction, and a teenager shows up at Micah's door claiming to be his son. These surprises, and the ways they throw Micah's meticulously organized life off kilter, risk changing him forever. An intimate look into the heart and mind of a man who finds those around him just out of reach, and a funny, joyful, deeply compassionate story about seeing the world through new eyes, redhead by the side of the road is a triumph, filled with Ann Tyler's signature wit and gimlet-eyed observation. Not for me. I mean, if I hear enough good feedback from people, I might be curious, but that sounds like a story I've read a bunch of times before. I don't need to read a book about a guy who can't get his life together again. I've gone on record as saying that that is not something I'm interested in reading a whole lot right now, even when written by a woman. So that is likely one that I will take a pass on. Next we go to another one that is completely new to me, Sugibane by Douglas Stewart. Sugibane is the unforgettable story of young Hugh Sugibane, a sweet and lonely boy who spends his 1980s childhood in run-down public housing in Glasgow, Scotland. Thatcher's policies have put husbands and sons out of work, and the city's notorious drug epidemic is waiting in the wings. Shugi's mother, Agnes, walks a wayward path. She is Shugi's guiding light, but a burden for him and his siblings. She dreams of a house with its own front door while she flicks through the pages of the Freeman's catalog, ordering a little happiness on credit, anything to brighten up her grey life. Married to a philandering taxi driver husband, Agnes keeps her pride by looking good. Her beehive, makeup, and pearly white false teeth offer a glamorous image of Glaswegian Elizabeth Taylor. Did people have beehives in the 80s in Scotland? They didn't in the US. Interesting. But under the surface, Agnes finds increasing solace in drink, and she drains away the lion's share of each week's benefits. All the family has to live on cans of extra strong lager hidden in the handbags and poured into tea mugs. Agnes's older children find their own ways to get a safe distance from their mother, abandoning Shugi to care for her as she swings between alcoholic binges and sobriety. Shugi is meanwhile struggling to somehow become the normal boy he desperately longs to be, but everyone has realized that he is no right. A boy with a secret that all but him can see. Agnes is supportive of her son, but her addiction has the power to eclipse everyone close to her, even her beloved Shugi. A heartbreaking story of addiction, sexuality, and love, Sugibane is an epic portrayal of a working-class family that is rarely seen in fiction, recalling the work of Edouard Louis, Alan Hollinghurst, Frank McCourt, and Hanya Yanagihara. It is a blistering debut by a brilliant novelist who has a powerful and important story to tell. I have a little bit of reservation, but that sounds fascinating to me. I am a child of the 80s. I love a story about sexuality. I have a difficult relationship with my mother. I have a lot of family members who have struggled with addiction. So this kind of ticks a lot of the boxes that I'm interested in. So it kind of gets me. That is one I will definitely be looking further into, and probably looking into reading at some point. Another one that is completely new to me, Love and Other Thought Experiments by Sophie Ward. Rachel and Eliza are hoping to have a baby. The couple spend many happy evenings together planning for the future. One night, Rachel wakes up screaming and tells Eliza that an ant has crawled into her eye and is stuck there. Ugh. She knows it sounds mad, but she also knows it's true. As a scientist, Eliza won't take Rachel's fear seriously, and they have a bitter fight. Suddenly, their entire relationship is called into question. Inspired by some of the best-known thought experiments in philosophy, particularly philosophy of mind, Love and Other Thought Experiments is a story of love lost and found across the universe. No. There was a window where it could have been appealing to me, but that last part about based on thought experiments in philosophy really loses me. So this one is going to have to work very hard to try to turn around my opinion of it, or my willingness to read it. Next is a book I'm familiar with, but don't actually know the premise of, and I've always been meaning to look into it, so this is good. It's How Much of These Hills is Gold by C. Pam Zhang. Ba dies in the night. Ma is already gone. Newly orphaned children of immigrants, Lucy and Sam are suddenly alone in a land that refutes their existence. Fleeing the threats of their western mining town, they set off to bury their father in the only way that will set them free from their past. Along the way, they encounter giant buffalo bones, tiger paw prints, and the specters of ravaged landscape, as well as family secrets, sibling rivalry, and glimpses of a different kind of future. Both epic and intimate, blending Chinese symbolism and reimagined history with fiercely original language and storytelling, How Much of These Hills is Gold is a haunting adventure story, an unforgettable sibling story, and the announcement of a stunning new voice in literature. On a broad level, it explores race in an expanding country and the question of where immigrants are allowed to belong. But page by page, it's about the memories that bind and divide families and the yearning for home. Yes, I am interested in that. That definitely speaks to me, so I will be looking for that book. It has a very pretty cover, by the way. Not that that matters, but it does. And there you have it. Those are all of the long-listed titles. I believe the shortlist is usually 6 books, so I'm going to say, of those, I would like to see these two, The Mirror and the Light and Real Life. In the finals, I would also like to see Such a Fun Age, just because I know there are a lot of mixed reactions to that book on the internet, but it sounds really interesting to me, and I think the conversation that it has brought up is really interesting as well, so I would love to see that continue. I would also like to see This Mornable Body make it into the shortlist. That one sounds amazing to me. I'm really looking forward to reading that. Sugibane by Douglas Stewart, that one sounded amazing to me, and How Much of These Hills is Gold. Those are the ones that jump out to me the hardest of all of them so far. I will be looking further into them and seeking out some reviews. Maybe that will change my opinion of some of the ones that I bypassed, but just knee-jerk reaction to all of the long-listed titles, those are the ones that I would like to see advance, including these two. And I would love to hear what you think. Do you think this is a good shortlist? Are you appalled that Hamnet didn't make it, or that another book didn't make it? What would you like to see win? And let me know all of that. Drop it in the comments down below. Let me know what you're rooting for. Are you excited about the Women's Prize? That's coming as well. The final round of the BookTube Prize is coming up. We're heading into that season, and it's very exciting. So let me know what your favorite is. If you have recommendations, things I should avoid on this list, other facts about them, drop that down below as well. As always, I really appreciate your time. Thank you for that. And I will be back. Until next time, happy reading.